You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Demetrios Brinkmann, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Demetrios, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm super happy to have you on the show today and been really looking forward to this episode.
It's great to be here.
So, Demetrios, AI and AI agents now as well, right? And then compare that to all traditional software development, developing, testing, success factors, all the usual stuff. Do we actually have any clue right now how to handle that?
The agents are a fascinating one because they've been rapidly advancing over the last year, and I think they're getting more and more adoption. I wouldn't say we're at a place where they are stable enough to do what they've promised the world they're going to do, and you really see that in the reliability of them, like being able to do something 10 times in the same way. If you give it a task and you give it a problem, it is very rare that you can have 100% confidence it's going to solve the problem. But we're getting closer, and we're also seeing that sometimes it doesn't need to completely solve a problem end to end to be quite useful. So, for example, I've seen some AI agents that will just help try to root cause analysis some failures in systems. And by the simple fact that it can search through many different areas of your system and of your Slack messages and of your emails, and it can tell you, hey, we looked in this area and we weren't able to find anything that is interesting. That's immensely valuable for SRE who's trying to root cause analysis, like some kind of a failure. So I would say that we're getting closer. It's not there yet. And in my mind, it is still a question mark as to if it will ever be there. A lot of people are kind of taking it as a given, but I'm not sure we're going to see it for sure, like 100%.
No, but I agree with that actually, because I think that, and you said it's not stable enough, and that's why I asked you about developing, testing, all that stuff. Of course, developing we can do something. We just here's our API library. I'll ask you something, do something. Okay, so there we did it. Okay, but testing becomes if you give it access to all your APIs in SAP. You need to test every single case it could potentially do.
Yeah.
And I also think that what you just said with the root cause agent, well, we already had AI ops before ChatGPT, didn't we? They're doing something like that, or is there a deviation here, or is it something different?
Yeah, for this specific case, I would say the difference is that the ideal scenario that folks are trying to work towards is the agent will solve the problem and get you back online. That's the utopia that we're going for. It's not just giving you the right alerts. I've heard of AI ops being able to know which alerts are actually important and which aren't. And so then you don't get this alert fatigue within a product or a tool that you're using. But here the big difference is saying the agent ideally is going to be able to root cause analysis the problem and then go and fix whatever it is that needs to be fixed. And that sounds a little bit like a fairy tale, but that's what people are trying to go for. And I would say that there's still a lot of work to be done. However, we're charging full steam ahead. So if you can dream it, ideally we can put it into production at some point. And there's big differences between agents that are related to code uh, and versus the ones that are not. Because with code and computer systems, you can really tell if it works or if it doesn't.
Mm.
And so to evaluate the success of the agent is much easier than if you're asking it to do something a little bit more abstract and fuzzy, like write some copy for a social post.
Yeah, evaluate the output of I don't know, human task is more difficult than evaluating the output of a computer task, right?
Yeah.
But there's also this, it's either there's an undefined thing with agents. I see, that we work with things that are non-defined, non-defined scopes, and then there's the topic of agency, that it can do things, right? I think that's the two overarching dimensions of this that I think we need to explore, and that are difficult to manage both of them. But which ones do you think will get the most success with initially? Working with undefined processes or working with agency?
For me, it's very much like the use cases right now we're seeing a lot of success with for agents are in the coding realm.
Mm.
So helping folks code faster, better, and do things that are a little bit more cumbersome around creating projects or templates or cookie cutter, whatever. And the other area are with support chatbots or support bots, support agents. And that's taking a lot of burden off of support teams or support human agents that are just inundated. And so if you can get an AI agent to close or help with 50 to 60% of the tickets that are coming through, that is huge
Mm.
in your burden for the workforce that's trying to like keep your customers happy.
So this is not, so what you're saying is 40%. You said 40%, right? But most people are right now hunting 100% with agents, right? We want that's the dream scenario, right? I always say there's some Hollywood thing to this. We're dreaming about replacing everything in the whole, Klarna replacing all the customer service, 700 agents or
Yeah,
something like
what a
that.
joke.
Yep. but 40% is quite a lot, or just 40%, or just speeding up the 100% to work faster is also
Yeah.
a thing, right? Is do we need to have more realistic expectations or different expectations? So if I asked you to build a computer system to handle this problem, you said, okay, I can do that. I would expect that computer system to sort of fix all of it, but this is different, isn't it?
Yeah, and you got to start somewhere. You've got to be able to get and I imagine we'll see a little bit of both like you're saying. We're the folks that are actually talking with humans, they're going to be augmented in getting what you need, or they will get you what you need faster and hopefully better and more accurately. And then if you're able to just get what you need without talking to a human, even better.
Mm.
There's still the thing is, if you can have that filter of having your customer get what they need and being a happy customer because they got it and they didn't have to talk with a human, then that's great. And I would say, yeah, like I'm throwing out numbers or percentages wildly. 40%, I don't know if it's anywhere near
No, no.
that. It might be much higher, it might be much lower depending on the use case, but I will say any percent is going to be incredibly helpful because from what I've heard for the majority of the support use cases is it's there's just you can't get enough people to help with your support tickets, and it's a very stressful job. And also you don't really call in or try to talk to support when you're in a good mood. It's usually because something's gone wrong. So people that are dealing with those customers, you got to be like,
But do you think we're going to have labeled then? Because the thing is, whenever you automate anything, people get actually annoyed if you only automate 40%. I've been in automation for a long time, but especially with RPA and other kind of automations. And if it only fixes like 40%, people are like, well, which ones didn't it fix? Oh, I need to check that, and then it becomes an extra stress level, right? So, how do we think we overcome that thing? Do we need to label this is an AI talking to you, or and then we can sort of say, okay, I don't have responsibility for that, because people will feel responsibility. The 60% humans will, you get where I'm going. 60% humans will feel responsible for the 40% AI answers, and also if they're right, and then we'll just be not necessarily happy with it, but just be even more things to stress about and control.
Yeah. From what I've heard, as far as labeling, if it's AI or not, what I've heard from the majority of folks who are doing voice agents is that humans, you don't need to necessarily call out that it is an AI agent or a bot, because humans can tell something's not right, and it's just a little bit repetitive or cumbersome.
Yeah, and a little bit, is very polished as well. That's my my
Yeah, or there's
feeling.
just something that's not right, and you're thinking, but if it gets the job done and it gets you what you need, who cares if it, whatever it is, if it, is it human, is it an AI bot? And we've been trained for so long to not have good experiences with bots, especially on the phone, that now you kind of hope that this new paradigm is coming about where we can have good experiences with bots, and support is a great experience of that, where if you have a magical interaction with a voice AI agent, and it's like, whoa, this was different. But
Mm.
for some reason, not everyone has implemented them yet into their workflows. And that's where, like, the difference between the RPA and the voice agents, or just RPA and agents in general, is that there's the ability to go off script with agents that RPA doesn't necessarily have. And
Mm.
so the agents can, if you throw it a curveball, they can take that and then run with it in a way that I think, if you're trying to game out each possible scenario with RPA, you don't necessarily get as much.
But this also means that you're out of control, right? From an enterprise perspective, if it can answer anything, right?
Well, you can still put guardrails on it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
can't, and
access. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
like
But it can say things,
successful
right?
voice agents or successful agents in general need guardrails, because otherwise, if you're, you've seen the memes where someone's talking to a support agent and they say, "Are you human?" And the support agent will say, "Yes, I'm human." And it says, like, "Give me a React component and this and that," and it just spits out the code right away.
In
And
half a
so
second. Yeah.
you've gotta have some kind of governance on it. So there's what you can and can't say, and if, at the very least, because people will try and game it and it can get expensive for you.
But you're moving both sides here, right, Demetrios? You're both saying that this is something that will work and create a lot of value, and but you also called Klarna's use of agents a joke just a second ago, right?
I think they were a little bit sensational on it.
Yeah.
And I think it's currently adding a ton of value to a lot of companies. And so it's not that, like, oh, is this going to happen in the future? It's that it already is happening. And there's these very specific use cases, like the support use case, or like developer productivity,
Mm.
that we're seeing being etched out and we're seeing being very valuable. But with the Klarna one, I think what they, when you read into it a bit more, you recognize that they were trying to file to go public, and they wanted a little bit of buzz to pop that stock price, right? And
Mm.
so what better way to do that than to say that we're doing the tasks of 700 employees with AI? And maybe it's true. What do I know? It just feels a little bit like that was sensationalized for all the wrong reasons.
Mm. Yeah, but yeah, and I think people also tend to forget sometimes that all the things we're already doing with technology, all your ERP systems, and they are also an automation that if you go back before the ERP, how many tasks are then automated with an ERP
Mm,
system today? I think you're counting that in the hundreds as well, even for smaller companies.
yeah.
All the controls being done, all the checks. It's amazing, right? If but but uh, but it does seem, and I think I saw people on LinkedIn posting the popcorn meme, right? When Klarna announced it, like, okay, let's wait for this to uh, to mess up, right?
Yeah.
And I said that with a nicer word than I wanted to say, and I don't know if we'll see that until they've IPO'd.
Yeah, let's it's going to be an interesting one to see how it plays out because since they said that, since they wrote that blog post, I haven't heard much from
Mm.
them.
No, no, exactly. I feel also there's been the talk of town, but then we don't talk about it anymore.
Hmm.
It's really weird. But you're because you've seen a lot of other places where this actually went awry, right, and went wrong. Another thing I wanted to quickly discuss with you also is one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is that you have all these recorders. We've had that earlier also for different kinds of code, right? And now I always felt that whenever I used a recorder to produce any kind of code, it always just ended up giving me crappy code that I needed to debug.
Hmm.
Have we finally fixed that for everything? That if it is an LLM uh, really a recorder for everything, and are we happy with it, or is it still just something we need to debug? Or do you think in 2 years we'll think of it as something we need just to debug and we hate it?
I would say it depends on the mode that you're going into it with, like your mentality, but also the complexity of your system.
Mm,
Because if you're getting started from scratch, it is very different than if you are in a legacy code base that has, hundreds of thousands of lines of code.
mm.
And where you see it fall flat is the more complex the code base, the less that you can rely on it. But if you're
Yeah,
just
but
going,
Yeah, but every code base wants to be complex at the end. That's the point of all of it. You see all these napkins. Here's a napkin I wrote with a website, and it created the website. Yeah, okay, that would have impressed me in 1997. It doesn't impress me in 2025, right? You get where I'm going here, right?
yeah,
So you want your simple code to become complex code, and if it's crappy at complex code, or it will get better, but in the end, it will come. I don't know. It will just become another fraction of debugging,
yeah,
or what?
yeah, exactly. It's for me when you're looking at code, and again, coding is a very strong area because you have the potential to see, like, does it run or not? And
Mm.
so you can evaluate
And it's
the
language.
outputted code much easier than when if you're dealing with, did the poem speak to my heart or not?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't really have that binary sense like code does. And so what I am a huge proponent of is in the evaluating of these systems, code that I created with whatever it may be, Cursor or Copilot, is it still in the code base 6 months later?
Mm.
And that can give you an idea of like, does it have staying power? But the other thing is, yeah, like, unless it doesn't replace the ability of someone who understands the system and understands what the code is doing by any means, because it will get stuck and it won't be able to move forward. And unless you know what's going on, you're kind of SOL.
Mm. So it's about pushing forward. You have to push it forward, but it also pushes you forward to some extent. I just put that in a post that it's always able to push me forward. When I get stuck, I use it to get the push
Yeah,
forward, and but it's also the same the other way around. Also, also applies, right? It is definitely a co-assistant or co-pilot, actually, to that
100%.
extent. But did you see the study? I think it was half a year after ChatGPT came out in November 2022, so around summer 2023, or maybe a little bit earlier. Well, GitHub posted an article saying that they've experienced a downward code quality spiral because after ChatGPT, because there are a lot more pushes. So what you just said, if it's still in the code library half a year later, it's good. But now it seems that we're pushing more code than ever before.
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah, the spaghetti code. I think I saw this paper on how the quality of code has gone down. But I mean,
but seriously, right? Don't we need to take that seriously? Seriously, do we need to take that seriously? Sorry, I said too seriously twice. But I'm just thinking, right? We all like, yeah, we need to go here. This is the future. But honestly, hand on your heart, what do you feel?
I think if it makes folks faster at what they're doing or able to complete their tasks better, then even if it's not the best way to do it, it doesn't really matter, right? There's always been technical debt in
Mm.
systems. So it's not like now that we have AI, we're going to get on our high horse and say, well, we can't use this because even though it makes us faster and it makes it easier for us, it is increasing our technical debt.
No, but yeah, obviously, and I agree with that. But I do agree with that, and I also, I'm a big proponent of the technology as well. But I always say when we talk about things that are not code, that AI is not no excuse for no effort, right? So you need to still evaluate and check that it's right and all that. And is that what we're sort of lacking or sort of slacking off on, or do right now we do have them, right, senior developers, but will we also have that in 5 years that are even able to do that kind of review of an AI agent's code?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't see them just going away. Like deep understandings of code bases or how the code runs is not going out of fashion anytime soon because that's the part that is probably the most valuable.
That's a constant, you could say.
Yeah, there we go. The only constant.
So complexity increases, and then we need to understand the complexity of what's actually going on, right? So that remains a constant even though we code, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in a way that the deeper thinkers or the deeper understanding that you have, that's going to be the very valuable part.
Mm. One of the things that people are worried about is that when we are replacing junior developers with AI agents right now, then we will have no junior developers becoming senior developers. But you
Mm.
don't buy into that, or I'm asking you some
Not,
difficult questions here. I know that, Demetrius. Sorry.
yeah, no, I wouldn't say that you're going to have folks that just, it's like you skip a generation in a
Mm,
way. I think it's just you're going to have different types of developers who understand how to interact with AI generated code and AI agents
mm.
differently, right? Like the television came out and you had TV stars and then movies and movie stars and then YouTube and YouTubers. And so you have folks that are able to capture the medium in the best way that they can.
And we just haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, or we have like there are some folks that I've seen that are able to be like the conductor at an orchestra
Mm.
and conduct all different kinds of pieces and in their AI systems. And it's not just with code, but when you start to see like, well, maybe an agent could do this, and if you can spin up an agent faster than you could spin up a traditional code base or a traditional program, that's where it's insanely valuable. Because if you are thinking about, okay, it would take me 2 or 4 or 5 days to create a program that would do that, or I'm able to just spin up an agent that can do that, and I know fairly well how to put the right bounds on the agent just to see if what I'm thinking is viable, then that's where you start to see like, oh, okay, maybe there's something here.
Mm. But it also, if I add all of this up, right, then we have we still have a testing set up where we can't test all of the cases necessarily that it can do. We can develop stuff faster, and we'll have multiple more pushes probably all over all the time. Does that mean that all of IT, or maybe the entire world, will become, an agile project? It's no longer waterfall. We don't trust that we can actually map out what's going to happen, but we can say we can always change it in a heartbeat.
Mm, potentially. And again, like I don't want to understate there how important it is to have like all of the enterprise features on your agents so that you can't get there's a lot of security vulnerabilities if you are going to bring these different pieces to production. So it's not just like, oh well, yeah, I whipped it up in a day and now I've got this agent that can do whatever XYZ that I used to pay a SaaS company thousands of bucks a month for. I don't think it's there yet, or again, like potentially won't get there, and that's a bit of a utopia. But I do think, yeah, I like the idea of if the more that we can lean on agents and try to get there and see where they fall flat and see where they work, that's an exciting area of exploration.
Mm,
And
but it just feels like you're saying one, and you're I know you're balancing it, but you're very adamant that you almost don't believe that this will ever be, full agents that can do anything, right? Also, it also makes sense because the world will be evolving, and there'll always be a gap, right, to what's actually going on and what we're doing and what we know we should be doing. But it does seem like you're there's this. I'm just trying to probe at some doubt from you, right? You see that I've been doing that for a while now, figuring out where is it that you're like, okay, I believe that this will work for doing this and that and all, and most things, a lot of things, and then you see, oh, but I don't think we'll ever get to that stage. I'm trying to figure out uh, how your thoughts are sort of constructed around um, this issue.
so, like, like why I am doubting,
Wh-
or
why you're doubting in the long run that we will get to, full agentic setups in enterprises, and while you're still not doubting it at the same time.
yeah, well, I just think I've seen too many successful use cases. And
So why don't you believe it will go to full scale?
I feel like there's the compounding problem where one agent makes or has a percentage probability of making a mistake. And then if you compound that out, the more complex the task that you give it is, the more probability that the fifth agent is going to be making a mistake because of everything else that it's built on. It's almost like built on a house of cards. And so that feels like it's a very large hurdle that we are going to
Mm.
try and get over. And maybe it's that we need different types of models that are going to be the base models that can help so we don't have that compounding mistake probability. Or maybe it's that we learn how to give agents their agency in the right place and not necessarily think like, oh, we're going to replace this whole program with an agent. It is more like we're going to put an agent in this one step of the flow. And that's where I feel like we're heading towards, is right sizing where we need agents versus where we don't. And
Then I agree with you very much. I've said it also before that it's about, I like to say AI roles instead of AI agents, because agents sound like they're, James Bond's with license to kill and whatever, right? I don't want
mm,
it to have a license to, I don't know, sudo, or drop table. But but I but I want to have an AI that sort of gets on the stage, perform the role I defined for it, and then gets down again and hands it over to a human or whatever. And that also means that the big task is designing the human in the loop setup, right? To some extent, that's what we need to figure out. I've been saying that at least. And do you think that that's what we need to look at, or let's just shift a gear? What should companies invest in right now, more time in and more money in exploring right now?
Yeah, I think it's hard to make a blanket statement on where companies should invest their time, and I would say the main things that we're seeing the most use cases and the most development happen for are in areas of developer productivity
Mm,
and the support agents. But you're seeing other companies that are trying to explore with like e-commerce, and are there different ways to present your e-commerce stores that are more agentic, that as opposed to static. uh, I don't
like personalization on steroids, right?
Yeah, and I don't know I've seen any that I can point to that are runaway successes. I've seen folks that are trying to figure out a way, like, oh, you could talk to the catalog of items, and so this is great where you have a website that has a ton of SKUs,
Mm.
and you go in there and you say, I'm looking for, let's say it's like an outdoor shop, and I'm looking for a sleeping bag, but I want it to be really thin because it's going to be not that cold where I'm going and I'm hiking for days. And you can tell an agent that, and then it will surface the right sleeping bags for you. I don't necessarily know that that is groundbreaking for me as a customer.
Mm.
Is that going to increase my likelihood of buying something? That
That's the
still is.
Yeah, but that's the whole. It's the whole. Now you can chat with your data. Yeah, okay, but I didn't ask for that. I don't know if I need that. you know.
Yeah. Well, there is some cool stuff I've seen with, speaking of chatting with the data, of being able to change graphs and change the views of graphs or the data visualization
Mm.
through natural language. And I think that's cool. That's just a little bit of like a side area, and how much value that's actually bringing to companies is debatable. Like if we're talking about real valuable stuff that companies, again, going back to what you were saying, where should companies be investing? I'm
Not the 10%, cutting edge ones, but the 90% who doesn't have the budgets to do crazy stuff, right? What should they do?
Yeah, I think it's just like check the support use cases. That's probably where you're going to get the biggest lift from
Mm.
agents right now. Those are, and if you have developers, I give them as much free reign as possible with these new tools like cursors and Windsurfer and whatever, like pay for their enterprise license so that they can see if they find it valuable and if they actually are able to get lift there, because those two areas are not going away as
Yeah,
far as like a useful areas to be using AI in the workplace.
you founded the machine learning ops community, right? How big is it now, Demetrius?
I would say we've got it. It's hard to tell because like it does, if somebody comes to a meetup in one of the 30 cities around the globe, is that person part of the community or not? So
Mm.
we like to say we've got around 70,000 people in the community, and then maybe there's another 100,000 that are adjacent because they've come to some event or they've done something with us once. And so
But it's still quite cool, right, to have sort of started I don't know, movement. It's not like political movement, but it's
Yeah.
but you get the community around this, and also, of course, in an AI hype. I'm going to get back to that, but you founded this, and you obviously speak to tons of developers. I think that's
Mhm.
also obviously why your good use cases will naturally be skewed towards developers as well, right?
Yeah.
It makes sense, right? But so I wanted to ask you, it was one of the things I had in mind to ask you, say, if you're going to need developers in 2025 and 2030 or further on. I think you already sort of answered that. You said, yeah, for complexity, it was still increased. We always spoke about that. But a question I've asked other people also on the podcast is, has language sort of become the new code? Are these LLMs a new interface to our data? In 30 years, we're going to need software, or just data lakes and large language models. Do we still need to know our requirements? So many questions, Demetrius. But I think with all the chats you're having and you've been having, I presume, over the last couple of years, and also probably even before everyone else started talking about this, I'd really like to know how you see software development and software in general in 30 years. I think it's a crazy question. And when I say 30 years, it means it's after your career has ended. So you don't have to, it's not going to be on you if it doesn't come true, right? If I say
Mm.
10 years, it's much more difficult for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like in 30 years, we're for sure going to be seeing orchestrators of systems and less single person. You already see it going in that direction where you can have agents doing different things and you're just defining requirements and then they're going out and doing it. And the ability for them to do that in more and more complex systems is only going to grow in my eyes. So coming back to that like idea of or that question you asked, are we just going to be debugging? Potentially it's that, or potentially it's even less debugging and more refining requirements
Mm.
and understanding exactly what it is that we are trying to get to. And the on that one, it's fascinating to think about like what abstraction level are we going to be playing at? Because in 30 years, like I hope I'm not still looking at my phone. I hope there's a different medium there. So how are we going to be doing it? Is it going to be just us pinching the space in front of us to make things bigger? Like that still is very,
Like Minority Report style, is that what you're
yeah.
thinking?
And so if
Are
we're doing that, I
we gonna have
really,
interfaces? That's my thought. We're gonna have an interface, because an interface is just someone who has thought of how you should structure the underlying data, right?
yeah, yeah. The interfaces will be fascinating to look at, and also how we can manipulate those interfaces. So is it going to be just us talking with the system to give us different pieces of an interface how we want it and personalized to what we're trying to do? So yeah, I wonder about the future of the interfaces and how gung ho we are about like just plugging into the matrix all the time. Like if I'm wearing the Meta Ray-Ban glasses and I'm constantly seeing a screen, whether I want to or not, eh, that's cool. But how cool is that? I don't know. I would like to. I don't know. Maybe see it, be in a world that I'm not necessarily always plugged in,
Mm.
but maybe that's me like too conventional, too traditional thinking.
So a founder of the machine learning ops community is saying he doesn't want to be plugged in.
Well, not all the time for sure. No,
But
that's
it's I realized I didn't I don't know if I realized, but I put it in words that way a couple of days ago that over the last 30 years, 30 years ago we had my life was completely algorithm free, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I played a computer game sometimes, right? But today, politics are skewed by algorithms and social media. Consumerism is algorithms deciding what I should look at to buy and want. My relationships is a Tinder algorithm. My friends also driven by algorithms and who I meet and who I talk to. You and me speaking is an algorithm on LinkedIn that sort of connected it. Every, everything is sort of algorithmic today, right?
Mm.
And I've spoken to a lot of people who has a utopian or dystopian expectations about the future with AI and even more algorithms, right? But what are from the community, and of course you can't talk for everyone in your community, but what are the utopian and dystopian, messages there? You must have some.
I don't know if I pay too much attention to that, to be honest. I don't have necessarily like utopian and dystopian visions of what the future holds. That's not just your traditional narratives.
Mm. So everything's more practical because you see people being like, "Oh, we're going to lose our jobs, and we're going to be, our kids are going to be just taught by agents and all that, right? That's a dystopian, and utopian is going to be the world of abundance and excess and all that, right? And change of the whole capitalistic evil system and blah blah blah, right?
Yeah, I get the feeling it's probably somewhere in the middle. And one thing that is wild, speaking about kids being taught by agents and all that, is the traditional way that we've been doing tests on intelligence. That's going to change completely, because if you can have AI give you scores that are through the roof, then how are we testing someone's intelligence? It's not who the last five emperors were in Rome, and the memorization has been like slowly dwindling when it comes to testing intelligence for years, but now even more so. It just shows that intelligence is hard to nail down in that regard. The ways that we're trying to say, like, is someone capable of doing something? How do you test for that? That I find fascinating.
Mm. Yeah, definitely, and it's all about inference in every aspect has become more important than data, maybe, right? Just to some extent, right?
Hmm. Well, and just if you're going to hire someone, if you're a business owner and you're going to hire someone, how do you traditionally, like if it was with coding and you're hiring an engineer, maybe you give them a leak code and a leak code test, and you ask them to do that, or you do some pair programming with them. But if you can always go to ChatGPT or Claude or Cursor and get hints for your where you're stuck, or you can just have it write it for you and give you the answer, then again, like, how are you deciding on the person? How do you have the confidence that that person is going to be able to do what you need done?
You don't need anyone who knows the language. You need someone who has the abstraction level to understand the complexity of your problem or your issue, right? That's what you're saying, and I think that is something that we're still trying to um, on a larger scale to sort of get our heads around. We're really not there any at all yet. It's just, this is still like the internet was when we were downloading from Pirate Bay or something like that. Some
Yeah.
people were downloading from Pirate Bay, and now we are at the Netflix age instead, right? So we sort of learned that there's a different way to do this that's smarter and better and more compliant and all that. But uh, to some extent, that's the same with coding and writing, and language is just one thing that worries me personally is how language is not just a tool. It is the fabric of human civilization and society, right? And we are hacking that. And that worries me a little bit, because if you just look at it as a tool, then obviously we can, uh, optimize that, or we can just get. I don't need to learn Python or C or a VB script. I don't need to learn that because I can just use ChatGPT. I just need to understand the basic concept of coding, right? To some extent, and what I want to do with it. But it goes bigger than that and beyond that when we move to everywhere else we're using language as well. And suddenly it's how we're interacting, how I'm writing to you, how you're speaking to me, yeah, everything we do.
Yeah, I saw, funny enough, a report on how Nigerian English has taken over the internet because a lot of the labeling work that OpenAI did was subcontracted in Nigeria. And so you have like these very specific AI outputted words like delve,
Mm,
and
hmm.
that's because it's a very Nigerian English type of word. And so in the training data, you had lots of that being input in, and so now you get it as a second order effect. You start to see like, oh wow, ChatGPT really likes to say delve for some
Yeah,
reason.
yeah, it
Well,
does.
turns out it was because of all that, all of the subcontracted work, labeling work on the pre-training.
That's funny. I didn't hear that. I didn't know that actually. I just really noticed the delve word
Yeah,
everywhere, and I hate it. And everyone, whenever you see someone say "write delve," you're like, "Oh, I don't even know if I want to read this." But
yeah.
because have they even read it themselves, right? It sometimes feel like that,
Hmm.
or at least I trust they do. But I always think, have they read it? And that annoys me. That afterthought. Because I want people to be enabled to use it, because some people are not good at writing and they're enabled by these tools, right? But I always get this fear that maybe they didn't even read it, and why
Hmm.
am I reading it then? Am I making a fool of myself, right? What am I doing, right? But also this thing you're saying here with Delve, um, in Danish, when we say, for instance, computer interface, it's not two words; it's one word. That's just the
Hmm.
way we write in Danish, right? And now Apple updated their the keyboard because it was crap before. So now they made it better and more AI enabled. And now suddenly it's taking all the Danish words and making them into English two words. So computer interface in Danish has now become a
Uh-huh.
word or concept, instead of, as it is, a one word in Danish, which is immensely annoying because it's mixing languages suddenly together, right? It's
Hmm.
making it even blurrier than it was, the grammatical structures, and then we have to think that what was the quality to the way we did it, and those discussions, right? That is back to on another level, the debugging, that we're just debugging now. We have an auto writer, but now we're debugging and figuring out, is it valuable that we write it in one word? It's the reason we did that. Why do we do that? What are we losing if we don't do it? And that is just that's what annoys me, right? That's where I think the debugging comes in on a higher level. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But is the I'm not sure I understand what the problem with the debugging is if you get efficiency gains.
But the problem is that you need to always evaluate, and you need to also always check: is this good enough? Is this good enough? Is this good? It's this kind of doubt all the time. Is this good enough? I had a professor who said that the whole um, being critical of everything is a much harder mental effort than just accepting things. It's like 100-fold, sitting there being critical. Whenever he's reading something he trusts, he just reads it and he's okay, right? But now, if he has to be critical of it, like when he's a professor and he's evaluating a paper, it's a much more exhaustive mental process. And if we're sort of getting to a point where we have to do that about everything, and also consider why is this even valuable, right? All the time. Then the question becomes, like with coders, if you use a recorder and you're spending the same amount of time or more debugging, and you still end up with a worse product, then it becomes on a societal level: are we spending more time now debugging instead of producing, right? And then we haven't saved anything. So we've had ChatGPT and AI for years now, but how many companies, except Klarna, we already spoke about, has actually gained the productivity value that they were promised?
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that argument. And I think I've made it in the past too. Like we've all had the experience of going to ChatGPT and trying to get something output, but we spend more time prompting it
Mm,
than if we actually just went and did the task. So we're prompting it for so long, trying to get that output that we're looking for, that really an hour later we think, man, if I would have just written whatever I needed to write
mm,
in the first place and not messed around with ChatGPT, then I would be done already.
mm.
But instead, I'm fiddling with this prompt, trying to craft the absolute perfect prompt.
Yeah.
And you, I think with time, we're going to see that these use cases become more and more clear.
I think that, we need to do, as we spoke about earlier, we need to define it more, right? The definition stage, and that's back to my whole problem with agents. And I have a problem with agentic because it seems like we don't need to define; we just need to give it access, and then it will fix it. But the definition thing, I really believe there's tons of value in having it work on use cases in a defined manner. Say you do only this, and I know that you can then hallucinate in that this space, right? But I can also put another AI agent that's also defined to correct you if you make a mistake, right? So I can actually define an orchestra, right, that does things
Yeah.
that I know I'm conducting it, right? But the whole agent thing, where just whatever, and this is how you use your chatbot. That's the example. When you sit down and chat with a chatbot, it can do whatever, it can say whatever, and you need to chat until you get the right answer. But if you start, you find the right prompt that's productive, and then you said put that into an orchestra, then it maybe makes I think it makes more sense. I just think we're sort of again moving to we're moving with the labs messaging, right? Where they just want more consumption and bigger consumption. And that's why it has to be anything can be done with this ASI, right? Artificial super intelligence and blah blah whatnot. But really, most companies just struggle to to define and constrain it on a use case. Companies are not agile at heart, They do things, they take things in, they structure it. They don't just, whatever happens. That's not how companies work.
Yeah, I think that's best practice. Like what you're talking about is very much best practice, and giving less scope to agents is better
Mm.
than saying, all right, we're going to have an agent that runs my business for me, or we're going to have an agent that plugs into the ERP system and is able to file claims or respond to claims and rewrite emails, or at least present an email to a human, and the human can give the green light if that email is worth firing off, and they can like double check everything. And that's where the smaller the scope, the more likelihood of success I think you get with agents and with their capabilities.
But that's really cool that you're saying that with the know how you have and the experience you have in the field as well, because this means that there's something wrong with the agentic focus right now.
Well, I would say people who are creating agents, they've seen you find out very quickly that it's much better to, even when you're creating the functions of an agent. Like I can give you an example that a friend was telling me about the other day on, you want to try and offload as much of the hard stuff as possible from the LLM. You don't want the LLM to be doing any more than it needs to be doing, because
Mm.
that's where you can introduce a lot of problems. And my friend was saying how it's like the most dangerous part about driving a car is the human that's driving it. And that's almost like when you're dealing with agents, the most dangerous part of the agent making a mistake is if you give the LLM too much control over
Mm,
what needs to be done. And so if you think about, let's take an example of, there's a database that you give your LLM access to, and the database has a bunch of statistics on football players and what they've done over their careers, and it's up to date on all of these different, how many goals they've scored, how many passes, how many kilometers run in different games, et cetera, et cetera. And so you've got a pretty hefty database there, and you have two ways of structuring how you can let that LLM interact with that database to get the information it needs to the human end user. One could be, and again, this would be, I would say this falls under the agent scope, because you're giving an LLM a tool that it can use, which is the database,
mm.
and it can now search through this database. And so you build your function, you build the tool calls that the LLM can do, and you can do it in two different ways. One could be the user asks you a question, the LLM interprets whatever the question is, like how many passes were successful from XYZ person. And the LLM now has to create a SQL statement to go and figure out the amount of passes that were successful. And so you're putting a lot of responsibility and burden onto the LLM to create the correct SQL statement. And that is in the example of giving an LLM a lot of scope. But you can also say, you know what? We've got a list of questions that folks ask. And why don't we just create a function for each one of these questions? Because this is software engineering and we are used to creating thousands of functions. So now when you ask how many completed passes were there, instead of the LLM creating a SQL statement that may or may not be correct, the LLM just has to know, oh, they're asking about passes complete. That's this function where the SQL statement is already created correctly. And
But
now it
Demetrios,
can go and interface.
but isn't this just, isn't it how Google has been working for like 30, 25 years?
How so?
Google, by you ask a question and it knows what to look for to some extent, right? It an NLP already knew that, matching. Maybe I'm mistaking here, but isn't that the same principle? So when I Google things, it has to give me the right answer, right? So it sort of maps my question to a subquery, right?
Yeah.
Do we need ChatGPT for that?
Well, later, if you wanted to then take that. So, if we're talking about just like a simple, yeah, question answer, and Google is like the internet, right?
Mm.
So I'm not sure I totally see the parallel.
No, but I've seen other people in the machine learning community say, Google has already been, a really good NLP system that's been able to do these things and understand what you wanted to do, and then giving you the right answer, right? So it's so in some to some extent, it feels like it's a technology we've already had, and what you defining the functions also sounds very decision tree like, right? It doesn't sound like the full. It doesn't sound like the prom. You have all of the labs in Silicon Valley talking about AGI right now and agentic at the same time. That sounds like a completely different thing than the halfway decision tree solution you just described, right?
I'm not sure I'm following like the I guess with Google you've got search,
Mm.
and when it comes to what I'm talking about, in a sense it is search. And so but you're giving different tools to search. So I now don't need to know SQL in order to be able to search through this database,
No, but I
right?
don't need to know SQL to be able to probe the whole internet with Google either, right? That's my point. I didn't do that and didn't need to know that 20 years ago. I didn't need to know
Yeah.
even how the internet worked, right? Basically, I just
But
needed to answer
you
the
couldn't
question.
necessarily search through a database.
No, no, but if we but couldn't we have this defined that up as well in a decision tree setup, before, right? I get maybe it's become easier, but it does seem. I think Matthias on the podcast said, all the things that we're talking about use casing for Gen AI use cases right now is something we could also most of it have done 5 years ago with other techniques.
Yeah. Now, so I can semi agree with that. I will say just because we could have done it 5 years ago with other techniques doesn't necessarily mean that it is easy to do, and that you give 90% of the people that are trying to create that the capability of doing it. Like, it went from being a very small niche of person that could
Mm,
potentially do that 5 years ago to now anybody with cursor.
mm,
So, and how quickly you can do it is another thing. So,
mm.
how capable and how quickly. And so that's where you get into like, okay, we're breaking down the barriers to entry a lot.
Yeah, it's much faster to do. Uh, I like the idea of asking it a question and it generates a SQL statement. We also made solutions like that, and it's something for being creative with your data and figure out what could be the things and analysis that would make sense to do, right? But then when you're starting to make functions that it just calls a function, then you're already predefined, and then we get much closer to decision treeing, right? Because what if it chooses the wrong function? Oh, we can avoid that by just bundling them into categories, and then let the user just click through. Do I want this one? There you go, right? And then you have an interface again.
So
Then you're back to
you're,
square one with software, right?
yeah, you're, it's like, yeah, it is easier to give the LLM that responsibility, but then you're going to the reliability aspect.
Yeah, but
Like,
that's where we're heading. That's exactly where I'm thinking this discussion right now. Is that we if you are completely right that you get all these responsibility on the LLM and you might get all the mistakes and hallucinations. But if you do the other thing, you just have a lot of functions that is calling. Okay, but then I say, okay, I want to make it even better at that. So I'm going to categorize all of my functions as well. Okay, and now I'm going to make a category for the categories and so on and so on. And then suddenly you just have, a tree, a decision tree. And then someone says, oh, let's make the LLM, but also let's just make an interface where you can click through that decision tree, 1, 2, 3. And then maybe what would people use? Right. Then
yeah.
it seems like we're regressing back to I don't know an interface for your data with defined use cases for your data. Am I wrong here?
Yeah, I think the what's probably more common these days than the decision tree or the knowledge graphs, and
Mm.
recognizing that how things interact with each other, um, and how each piece lives in the context that it's surrounded by. And so, I mean, whether or not it is the most valuable or the most practical is up for debate. And I could see your point where it's like, well, why are we doing this if what we already have is similar and kind of works? And so, yeah, like, it may be very well that we spend 10 years trying to push forward and we find out that this doesn't give us that much lift,
Yeah.
because we've gone and we've maxed out all the potential areas, and it didn't improve our quality of life that much, at least not as much as we've put into it. But I don't know, I like to think about on the other side of it,
Mm.
like the capability of going back to this idea of the SQL statement. like that's just potentially one step in an agentic workflow that could be many different steps. And
Mm.
you can then see that, all right, the question in itself, like me asking what the past completage percentage is great, but then can I ask to do things with that statistic? Can I grab 3 or 4 statistics, bring them into a table, and give me a much different interface of like, all right, cool. And can I filter a Google Sheet by doing that same thing and getting that? Yeah, maybe.
But you're just getting back to something that you can also do. I'm going to say it again. If it seems like most of the things are. I think a lot of people are trying to optimize things that are complicated and that we can already do, right? So I spoke to the founder of a company called Property, who does maintenance plans for buildings with AI, machine learning AI, right?
Uh-huh.
And he said that what we want to do is not necessarily go into a room that's already lit up and see if we can shine even more light here, but we go into a dark room where people don't have an overview, and then we just turn on a small light there. And that is my guiding principle for using this, not going into something that we already covered quite okay, and 95% okay, and then seek the last 5%, but going into something that we have absolutely no clue about, like operationalizing contracts and reading stuff that like that, getting those things to live in organizations, sort of make it part of the structured fabric of the business. And that's where I'm looking at value with this, right? But I feel like a lot of companies are seeking to, and Søren Friis Alexanderson also said this on the podcast, that from Microsoft, he's the principal product owner for Business Central. He said that well, Microsoft, everything has to be AI now. That is, I have to change my entire backlog into working with AI, and fix everything with an AI, basically, right? And that just seems to me that I believe there's tons of value in like structuring the unstructured into an organizational framework, but turning everything into it means you're already also turning all the things that are just today working very well, deterministic. You're turning it all non-deterministic, and you're alluding to some of the same things, right? But that's what annoys me. That is, and that's why maybe I come off my questions and everything like I don't know, a skeptic. But I'm not a skeptic. I'm just a skeptic of how we're applying it to things that are so non-imaginative, I think.
Yeah. It it gives me solace that it will shake down in a few years and we'll know where you get actual lift from these
Yeah, but you see
different use
still,
cases.
this AGI claims and agentic at the same time. It just means that we're pushing even more hype on it right now. That's what I feel. That's why it gets annoyed. I'm annoyed at agentic because it seems like just another level of hype that we need to debunk or figure out how to handle, right?
Yeah.
We were just getting there to narrow it down on some roles it could do to do things that are productive, and now we need to talk about it handling everything in the whole world. And I'm just can we just stop talking about it like that?
Yeah, the hype aspect is one thing, but the thing that probably made me change my mind about agents is seeing it add value and seeing there be different use cases and different workflows where the agents can be quite useful and they can eliminate a lot of repetitive work that people do and different tasks that you would normally have someone spending time on. You can plug them in, and if you are doing it correctly or smartly, like I said, with these best practices in mind, where you're trying to just
Narrow it
limit the
down. Yeah.
scope as opposed to saying that, like, all right, now I use agents for every piece and part of my business. That's one thing. But if it's just using agents, like I saw last night, a great example of agents being used for claims, and someone would send an email in or a fax in on a claim for a problem with, I think it was with manufacturing companies. And if there was a problem with the product, they would send in the claim. and you would normally have someone that has to process this claim, but they were able to get the agent workflow working in a way that 90% of this claim is processed, and then it's being shown to a human to
Mm.
give the okay. And it goes back to the RPA system question, like, oh, don't we already do that with RPA? Yes and no, I would say, because you don't necessarily get the ability to catch the curveballs with
I get,
RPA.
yeah, but I agree with that. Um, and I just realized as you spoke that we've been going over this also in this episode that agentic or agents. I said, I'd like to talk about roles instead because I don't like the things that the one that's doing that in that process. If you had a human do that, collect all this, they would be called the sales assistant, whereas the sales agent would be the one taking the last step, right? So you have an AI role, right? But I think the way that we're terming it as agents um, sounds like it's all encompassing everything, right? And that's why it brings me back to some considerations I've had many times about hype, is that hype constantly tries to blur our semantic understanding of what we're talking about to keep going. And that I think that is in essence what annoys me the most about agentic is is that it seems like a semantic deroute that just confuses everyone and makes them feel like, oh, and then you add all the AGI ASI. You see now they don't talk about AGI anymore. Now they talk ASI, and you add that too. Now we don't talk about AI. Now we talk about agents, and there you have it, right? Confusion again, right? Hate it because
Yeah.
it's the same thing. I've been thinking the same thing about defining them, making them work, do things like you just talk about. That's not new. You even said that's a best practice, right? And that's not a best practice if it's something that's completely out today, right? But people treat agents as something that's completely new, and it's not. It's the same we did when we just called it AI or AGI or we called it Gen AI. That's the same best practice for using Gen AI. We don't need the agent word, do we? Do we need the agent word? That's my problem.
The
Agent word, not world. Who needs the word agent?
yeah. I guess is the rant that there's just too much hype in this space, because I agree with that completely.
But I also want, and this is one of my last questions I had for you, Demetrios, is you founded the MLOps community, and how has the AI hype impacted this community and your career? So now that's the problem with hype. Now let's talk about what hype did for you personally. I love to hear that story as well, actually.
Yeah, I mean, ML ops isn't necessarily what folks think about when they think about I think. And so it was adjacent. It didn't necessarily, it wasn't the peak of the wave. Because when the AI hype came out, what it did was it enabled a lot of people that weren't working in ML or weren't working with AI to now be able to leverage AI. And so we had folks that were doing a lot of machine learning, traditional machine learning with the numbers, and not a lot of NLP or deep learning. And it was all about us putting those machine learning models, especially the traditional machine learning models, into production. And a lot of the community was focused on how do you productionize traditional machine learning.
Mm,
And then when the AI hype came out, it consumed everything. And so everyone, whether you were a machine learning engineer, a product engineer, a front end engineer, you were trying to play with it in some way, shape, or form. And since then, because of the way that a lot of people are in the MLOps community and their jobs are focused on the ML platforms at their companies, they now were getting questions like, hey, how are we going to support AI use cases and AI models as much as we're supporting these traditional models. And so it's just been an evolution of, all right, how are we now putting AI into production? And what are we doing to make sure that the companies have the right ecosystem in play to be able to have their employees or their end users leverage the AI systems as much as back in the day you had data scientists that were leveraging the ML platforms.
But it must also give some more attention on it, right? And suddenly talking about AI in a completely different spaces and right.
Yeah, I think more than anything, it just like had my parents and my family friends being like, "Oh, you work in AI?" And so then there was a lot more conversations around that at the dinner table.
Yeah, and podcasts, I guess, as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, different ideas on that, and really like because it was we were all trying to figure it out from the beginning. There was a lot of exploration that happened within the community and a lot of people trying to just figure out like, hey, is this valuable? What is valuable, if anything?
Hmm.
How have you been using it? What have you found to be successful or not successful? And so it was a lot of exploration.
But does it also did you find the holy grail to Gen AI ops or LLM ops? Is because I've heard a lot of people say that this is not something we don't even know at scale how this is going to look.
I mean, the holy grail, not necessarily. I would say it's just yeah, trying to because if you're looking at the platform team is just trying to enable the end users.
Mm.
And so the end users are the ones that are figuring out their use cases. One thing that you forgot that happened is this sprawl of folks using AI tools. And if you're in an enterprise, I can't imagine the AI governance work that needs to be done because you've got maybe a team over here that's using ChatGPT Enterprise, you've got another team over there that's using 10 different tools that use some kind of AI wrapper or something within the product.
Yeah.
And if you're focused on trying to have your data not leave your enterprise, you're kind of screwed.
And also every system is implementing some AI solution. Every SaaS software just suddenly has AI as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a really big problem actually.
Yeah.
I
So you
think
may inadvertently be sending your data to one of these providers.
mm, I think that's a cautionary note to end a great conversation, Dimitri. I think actually this conversation has been splendidly explorative and going different routes and trying to say things and things that are difficult to speak about. Actually,
Yeah.
it's not been lecture. It's been actually where are we going? What's actually going on, right? So I really love that, and I want to thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um,
I am a huge proponent of trying to see what's real and cutting through the hype. And I like looking at it through a critical lens. And I like that you brought a very critical lens to the conversation because I don't like to just like blindly follow it and trying to articulate why I think certain things are valuable or not valuable is always useful
mm,
exercise.
yeah, that's what I loved about this episode as well. So I think uh, some episodes become where the guest speaks more, and I think we spoke equally and actually had a real conversation around this. I really love that. So thank you very much for that. But now I actually want you to lecture a little bit on a monologue with my final question, if you're ready for that.
Yeah.
So, Demetrius, what is the only constant?
Hmm. mean, there's so many ways to go with this one, right? The only constant, if you have to choose just one, and there's only, in the way of the question is basically you're saying there's only one constant, the only constant, which I think is a little bit flawed because there's probably many constants in life. And if we are sticking with just one, the only constant is right now, I would say, is the tendency to potentially dive into complexity, or the tendency for systems to become more and more complex over time. That could be seen as a constant, just system complexity getting more and more complex. Otherwise, when it comes to us as humans, the only constant that, I mean, I don't think I like the idea that there's only one constant. And that's probably where, because when I say the only constant, I instantly think, okay, there's only one. Are we have to zero in on that one option that is the only one? So the only constant is there are many constants.
That is a great answer, Demetrius. I like that one, and I also like that you also, when you had to choose one, you chose increasing complexity, which again, just reinforces the plethora of constants, right? Because
Yeah.
that's complex as well. I don't think I've had anyone on the on the podcast think as much in silence on what is the only constant as you just did. But I value that highly, because when I started the podcast, I said I want people to pause, to reflect, and if I can do that, my podcast has succeeded. And, and you've done that tremendously today. So thank you so much, Demetrius, for that answer, and thank you so much for being on The Only Constant. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.